homelessness, and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, 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 not God Bless America. God damn America, that's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America, as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
You know what? I was saying off mic that I might send this to my grandmother, and I just listened to the theme song of our show. And hey, Grandma, if you made it through that, it's not going to get that much worse. And that's not us. That's Reverend Wright. He's had a filthy mouth on him, that man.
Yeah, and he's not even our generation. So
yeah,
can't hold this against Zoomers like us.
this is actually better that he opens for us, and then we get to like exist. You know how like you have an opener that is like way weirder, and then you get to like perform in their wake and go, "Wow, that guy was messed up, not like me." Anyways, hello everyone, welcome to the show. I am Jake Flores. That's Anders J. Lee.
Anders J. Lee here. Hello, Jake's grandma.
And joining us is friend of the show, returning guest, funny guy, funny leftist, funny Mexican, Gabe Pacheco from
What's up, everybody? Cartels. Yeah, you got to listen to Halal Cartels. That's what it's all about. Thank you for having me, Jake. Thank you for having me, Anders. Big Pod Damn America fan, fanatic listener, and I'm really excited to be here today.
Thank you for being a representative of Mexican leftists and stuff. For this, you have a job today, you know, just to represent. I don't know.
Heavy is the crown, homie. Heavy is the crown. La raza, los izquierdistas, as well.
We're doing some Mexican history today. I thought, you know what, I should get a funny Mexican leftist to sit in with us for the show.
That's right. You know what?
I couldn't find any, so I found Gabe.
That's right. I wanted to say Mexican. You know, that's it's. Is it cultural? Is it national? You know, I'm a Chicano, baby. Mexico. Sure. Our family. My family's from the Southwest, and you know the border crossed us. Right.
That's right.
Yep.
I live on occupied land.
Right? I feel you.
Palestinians, free Gaza.
That's right. I mean, I guess I'm technically Tejano in that same way, but also I'm like mixed. I have a white parent and stuff. So all of this stuff also we'll go over as we discuss this, because what even these weird rules and categories comes from the story we are discussing today. A lot of these things aren't real, and if you're putting on your super anarchist thinking cap, none of the states things, none of this stuff is real, sort of. But we'll get to that. Okay, so I'm very excited to talk about what we're going to talk about today. I've been cooking this series that we're starting today for a long time, like too long.
It's simmering.
Yeah,
like a nice big pot of beans,
like a big nice bowl of menudo, but it's I cooked it like overnight to get the tripe nice and slimy.
Yeah, so like a good abuelita, like a good abuelita.
Yeah, I'm in abuelita mode today.
That's right. I should have said hello, Jake's abuelita.
That's right. Well, it's the thing is we call her both. So she's any grandma pronouns. She's grandma / abuelita.
I don't know. Hillary was my abuelita. So
she's
I'll learn how to say it one of these days.
Abuelita del mundo. Hillary.
You know what? Hillary is the reason that I believe in mutual aid. You know, the title of her book, "It Takes a Village," is what really radicalized me.
Oh, I thought you were going to say what happened.
I thought you were going to say because she carries hot sauce in her purse, and that's like mutual aid to always give hot sauce to homeless people and stuff. Oh,
sure.
Oh, that discarded food you're eating. It looks so bland. Here, have some Cholula. So the reason that I put this off so long, and that I'm talking about it, maybe I'll send this to my grandmother and stuff like that. If you don't know, I talk about this all the time. You probably know, is that the story of the Magonistas is a story that I have an ancestral link to, which we'll get to in the show. Someone I am related to is in this damn story, and it's part of my life, and for that reason, it's very important. And when things are important, I get really freaked out by them, and I put them off for a long time because I want to do them right. I want to make sure we nail it at least as hard as possible, you know. And I think it's an important story, and it's a very important story also because, like, not only for me for personal reasons, but I think it's an important story to tell, like, for political reasons and for historical reasons and stuff like that, because it is an undertold story for a lot of reasons, but it's massive. It's huge. It's mind-blowing where this story goes and how much it affects, and it's kind of undertold for a couple of reasons. One is because we're in America and they just don't tell you all sorts of stuff here because we get like horrible indoctrination. You don't learn about the Korean War. We did John Brown. We talked about that a lot. A lot of people don't teach John Brown. We don't teach radical things. We don't teach them correctly when we do teach them. I grew up in Texas where we had to learn about the Texas Revolution, quote unquote, like 100 times in a row. Like, seriously, you'd take Texas Revolution class and it was told all sorts of twisted. It is not a good revolution. It was a slave owners revolution so that they could own slaves. It was an annexation more than it was a revolution. But we were told it a certain way. So I got older and I learned stuff and I became a big brain theory leftist or whatever. And so I had to go back over stuff. And when I read through this, I thought, oh my God, first of all, they don't really teach us about about Mexican American studies at all. There are states like Arizona where it has been specifically mandated against to teach students about what happened here at all. And when you do get taught it, you get the main story. You get Zapata, Pancho Villa, Madero, the people that are kind of emblazoned in history who are very important and very cool. But this is like that's like Game of Thrones, and this is like the other one, House of Dragon or something like that. Like there's a prequel to this that honestly you can't really understand the Mexican Revolution without understanding Magon, because everything that happened here set the stage for the Mexican Revolution to happen. And even within Mexico, like it's a lesser known story. There was a concerted effort to like dig this stuff up after Magon died and go, hey, we got to talk about this guy. And that's why he's referred to often as the precursor. He's the precursor to the revolution, and none of it would have happened without him. And it goes in all these crazy directions. And it's for people who study history here, for leftists, for communists, for anarchists, for socialists of all stripes. There's stuff here that like connects to the IWW and American socialism in a lot of important ways. It goes crazy. We're not going to get to it today, but like he meets Emma Goldman and like all these American anarchists, socialists, leftists and stuff.
And
Mother Jones. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So very important story. And I'm very excited to tell it.
Well, before you even get started, Jake, I mean, something that I studied in college was the creation of the Chicano identity, like the creation of that like political and Chicanidad, not as sort of like, oh, you're a Mexican American, right? To be a Chicano was seen as something where you actually chose to take on. It's not like something you're born as. It's like you adopt this identity. It's a political statement to be like, I am choosing to become an unassimilated Mexican American living in this occupied territory. And it is traditionally a leftist identity, and it's also an identity that is internationalist, and that is one that seeks solidarity with all other peoples who are living under colonial oppression and rule around the world. So like in Washington, D.C., at the National Archive, I took Luisa Diaz from the YU Mad podcast there. And it blew her away because we looked at all of these posters of Chicano art from the 70s. And she was like, wow, this isn't an identity politics movement. It was every single one of the posters had like a Chicano with a Vietnamese like Viet Cong soldier. And then the next one was with a Black Panther, and then the next one would be with a Filipino. And when we think about like even the labor struggles with Cesar Chavez, it wasn't just a Chicano thing. It was this partnership between the Filipino grape workers, day laborers, and the Mexican day laborers working together. So like it is this global solidarity thing. And like even with Halal Cartels, the podcast I have now, you know, it is about like I'm down with like the Palestinians because of that Chicano worldview, right?
Yeah.
You know? And
yeah.
So anyway, I don't that I didn't want to take us completely off track with that.
No, that's perfect. I want to continue with this because that's another reason that this is important. Because like this also is very personal for me because it's weird being Latino. It's weird for me also being mixed Latino because that adds a hat on a hat in a lot of ways. And it like you have to learn what any of these words mean when you are told you are this when you're born, and learning what they mean opens up this huge box of like just it's like an onion that never keeps having new layers and stuff because if you truly understand like how the whole conception of Latin people and Mexican people and various all these other different categories we're using to define this came about historically, you realize it contradicts itself in terms of what race and ethnicity and any of these things even are, because most race is thought of really in like literally like black and white terms in America for reasons where, you know, those conceptions came about historically between black and white Americans. And so then you get into this weird era of like eugenics and thinking of people essentially as having a racial background and makeup. But then if you look at the history of the continent here, what happened is Spaniards, white people, came and like colonized the fucking like South American continent and the North American one. But you know, largely the South American one, and created what is referred to kind of like a race, but it's actually a mixed race group of ethnicities and nationalities that are all just lumped together, and it doesn't make sense. Eventually this nonsense logic like folds over on itself. And you know, I grew up calling myself Mexican when people ask me what my background is, which is a nationality, but there's so many Mexicans in Texas and like other places like Southern California that you just go, yeah, Mexican, that's a black guy, it's a white guy, I'm a Mexican. And then you kind of go, what the fuck? How's that work? Sorry, Grandma. I'm gonna curse a lot. I'm gonna try my best, but whatever. And you know, those things like they're all historical constructs. They're all fake, and they're, you know, they all are sort of susceptible to being manipulated in certain ways, which is why which just gets me to another like reason I think it's important to tell this story is because personally, anecdotally, it's taken me a long time as a leftist, as a student of all this, to really kind of articulate why things felt a little off for me forever living here in America and trying to understand where people are coming from and getting a lot of people who don't seem to understand where we come from and have like sort of a historical material amnesia. So a lot of them being white Americans who, for obvious reasons, want to cast Mexico as a competitor to the United States that just isn't doing well. But a lot of them being brown people, being Mexicans and stuff, who also get told that story and internalize it and go, yeah, America's better because Mexico isn't doing as well. And you don't understand that's what you're not seeing when you look at things that way is that these are like, it's impossible to disentangle the history and economics and, you know, the extraction and all that stuff of these two states and of every other state too. And Mexico is not a country that isn't doing as well as America. It's a thing that's being like extracted from by America historically. It's a parasitic relationship. It's an organ, you know, it's like a one big kind of economic process. Well, so it's like that Parenti quote where he's like, there's not poor countries. You don't go to poor countries to extract resources. There's poor people in those countries. Anyways, Gabe, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so many things that you brought up, but one is like, you know, when the West closed, right, with the conquest and domination from the East Coast out to the West, that sort of pioneer settler colonial mentality that was also tied into militarism kind of expanded into a variety of other wars, right? And it expanded into the conquest of Cuba, and it expanded into the genocide in the Philippines, and it also went down into the emerging markets and sort of how much of Mexico can we take as well. And so it is. So, and then when we think about culture, and you said it's so hard to have to learn, like Latinos or Mexicans have to learn who they are. I'd say the same goes for like Native Americans as well. And that is the process of, part of the process of colonialism is the obliteration of the culture keepers and the devaluing of the of what the traditional culture is, and rituals and practices of people, and then also the stealing of it. So, you know, examples of that would be like in Israel, Israelis using Arabic words and saying that their food is their Israeli couscous. It's easy to see it once you take it out of this context. But every American loves guac and chips. They all eat Tostitos. They all like salsa. They love Taco Bell. They love the idea of the cowboy. But like the cowboy, you know, the white horse riders were called horsemen. And the word cowboy is a word that was used for the Mexicans, the Indians, and the Black people who were the hands who then cooked the food at the fire and played the music and danced. And so, boy, right, that's a derogatory term, right? Yeah. And now we've taken that and adopted that, and now the cowboy has become what we consider Clint Eastwood in those movies. But at that time, it was called, if it was in that time, that character would have never considered himself a cowboy. He would have called himself a horseman, right? Like it would have not have been for him. It would have been for the Morgan Freeman character to be the cowboy. Right.
Yeah. And then we just steal that. And especially the like underclass stuff gets stolen, because then you get to cast yourself, the oppressor gets to cast themselves as the underclass and feel cool and stuff like that. And it's only after you killed a bunch of vaqueros you go, oh, I'm a vaquero, you know, I'm cool or whatever.
And so you kill the language, right? And Mexicans come here
like kneecap.
And they want to assimilate. And even that, like, because I came from identity politics before. I was always left, but I was steeped in identity politics in college. Sure. And so even though I believe there's this class reductionist model, I saw it, but I also saw it as like a white model, or like a European model of looking at leftism, because it didn't take into context the colonial framework that maybe somebody like a Fanon or even Mao would have added to the mix after we look at Marxist-Leninism. Because because those guys were able to see, like, no, what does communism look like on a global scale outside of the material conditions of Europe, right? Where whiteness was the default. Yeah. And the material conditions are tied to the cultural conditions of people being Yaqui Indians, you know, or being Navajo, or being, Jibaros in Puerto Rico. How do you reconcile these true, real identities with that are obliterated by the colonial markets that shame you for your beliefs and your traditional family structures, right? Like a lot of these colonized peoples had mutual aid ahead of time. Like they had stronger family organizations that were outside of the bourgeois nuclear family unit.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people would argue that stuff exists before private property, like it's referred to as primitive communism.
Yeah. So I'm always vacillating on the fence between like sort of an anarcho-primitivism, like a Luddite version of like hating tech, because technology is always used. It's always given to us as a promise of like, hey, it's going to make your life easier because you're going to have it's labor saving. But really all it is like gets rid of the actual laborers and forces you to do more work. Like email just means that we can now email our boss 24 hours a day.
Right. You know? Tech gets used not for use value, but for like extraction, for like consolidating their ability to extract labor out of us. And it's like the most tragic thing in the world. But that, like what you're talking about with like the being tempted to become a primitivist about this. It's like, I think, it's sometimes I think that way, like, we just got to burn it down and then just get back to like living like indigenous people. But the way I kind of think of it is like, we don't need to go back. We need to get back in certain ways, like use the tech to reestablish those dynamics of power, but don't throw the tech out, because like we can use the robot cars and stuff or whatever. It's a broad stroke, but
I'm not going to argue that. I am going to say, like, I look at reading Graeber's work, and and as a student of history, because I
a whole
teach
lot of Graeber in here.
It is like we look at the past, including this hidden past that we're going to be talking about today with Magone. We look at the past to give us examples for alternative possible futures. And so this is not like a Pol Pot, like let's go back to year zero when I think about the primitivism, right? It's more like let's dig through the hidden histories, the occulted histories, the histories that the colonial powers have tried to suppress, because these histories give us examples of hope and examples of like possible strategies for upending what is currently holding us all down.
It's also one of those things where you go, they wouldn't have erased all this stuff for no reason, like if you're arguing with someone who's like, is it important to dig all this stuff up? You go, they wouldn't be doing this if they didn't think it did something, right? So, I think it's very important. I was thinking about kneecap a lot, reading about a lot of this stuff, what they're doing with like, the Irish language and stuff like that, because when I was in Mexico there, and when I went to El Hijo de Huizote, which we'll talk about in a little bit, there was a lot of like classes on learning Nahuatl, which is like the language that got fucking stamped out there. Sorry, Grandma. And there was just also another huge thing that is, I think, a reason that I want to do this, and the reason this is important to think about right now is because with Trump and with just where the American mind is going and where conceiving of people and stuff like that is heading, something that's been making me feel crazy, like I'm just in like a non-reality talking to people from where they've gotten, is I've just been thinking a lot about how, like you said, we didn't cross the border crossed us. The left half of this country was Mexico, but more importantly, like also not more importantly, but like I just been thinking about the way we think about what we call Native Americans here, and what we refer to as north of the border indigenous people, and how we have this conception that they were all wiped out. And if you're talking about specific tribes north of the border, that's true. Like most of the Cherokees were wiped out or whatever. But we have this conception that the indigenous people of this continent as a whole were eradicated. And it's like when you go to Mexico, you just see a Mayan dude walking around. You see indigenous people and you go, oh, right. No, actually, this is like the majority of people still here. And this conception that they're gone kind of works to reinforce like it's like what they're trying to do in Israel, where they just eventually kill everyone and go, well, what are you going to do? I mean, that was bad, but you have to just allow this history to play out now, right?
Oh, let me talk about this for one moment. So there's cultural genocide. I wrote this down in my note. Assimilation is cultural genocide. Mm-hmm. So like, even that idea of being post-identity or post-race or whatever, like when I look at I think of the concept of whiteness is the absence of culture. And so when I meet people who are consider themselves white, I think, oh, that's a tragedy that you had a rich Irish history, that you knew your people knew how to dance, that your people had a concept of class solidarity and struggle. Or I don't know, I'll say the same thing for German people or any peoples. And then so it's this trap of like, if you give up the smelly foods, if you give up the weird spats, if you give up the weird hairstyle, you can become white. You can become a bourgeois middle class worker. And so by giving up those things that made people like part of a collective tribe with pride and a cultural history, they got to become white. And like you see indigenous people who have had their native religions obliterated, or the rituals that their grandmothers used to have, or they had to go to the Carlisle schools where they were raised and abused by like Christian Protestant fucking weirdos. Excuse me for cursing. And so you don't actually have to kill the DNA. Like you don't have to kill the skin color. Like you kill the cultural memory.
Oh, white people have no
Yeah.
culture. Gabe, explain Benson Boone. Anyways,
I would trade. I would listen to hours of Benson Boone in exchange for never having to eat lutefisk.
it sounds kind of good to me. I don't know, but I've never had it. I like salt.
Well, like I want white people to remember, like, okay, and this is where the alt-right comes into play, because I would say I would love it for a white person who was Irish to remember their Irish pride. But in the absence of that, the vacuum of having that sort of very hyper-specific identity, there is this incel drive on Reddit to go and fetishize or adopt, oh, I'm the heir of Western Civ. I am. And so Western Civ becomes the proxy for authentically knowing your culture.
But is it still because this is a thing with, I'm half Irish, and that this is a thing with Irish Americans, is people get really into the Gaelic tattoos, and Italian Americans as well, and then they like meet people who are from Ireland or Italy, and they have like basically nothing in common. So isn't it true that we aren't like that thing anymore? Like, aren't we in a new phase?
You are, I mean, we're always evolving, right? No, there's identity is a fluid thing. So it's not to say that there's an essential identity. Like I'd say to say your Western Civ is a Hotep thing. Like if the Chicano identity had stuck to Aslan as a real place somewhere in Arizona that we need to get back to, and we need to reclaim it, the Chicanos would be as bad as Israelis. Right? Because then it becomes this essentialism, this myth that instead of it being like a more porous way of just looking at, like somebody asked me what makes it a Latino, and I'd say a hack comedian would say, oh, we all have my mom hit me with chanclas jokes. Right? It becomes cultural identity, superficial stuff. It's like Joanna Houseman's like, this terrible white
Venezuela.
Venezuela. She does the accent, and it's all the superficial trappings. And I go, being a Latino doesn't mean that you have any accent. It doesn't mean that you speak Spanish, English, or anything. It is the fact that your identity is you are the byproduct of transnational migration as an exploited labor force through the former Spanish colonies, probably ending up in the center of American empire now.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to touch on a couple of things you just said, because they're also really important to set all this up. This is part of the reason that, like, leading up to this, I did a bunch of episodes on like stuff like Fanon and also stuff like Kropotkin and stuff like that, is that this is all going to appear in this story. And this is where a lot of Fanon comes in, I think, is talking about like the question of like nationalism or like cultural identity. Are these things good or bad? Well, the answer might be sometimes yes, sometimes no, and it depends where you are at in the dialectical process of trying to liberate people. And so for that reason, like, sometimes like I find it kind of odd that I'm like, you know what, I don't have a tendency, I'm not a tendency guy, but I always tell people the closest one, I'm kind of into anarcho-communism, which is weird because I was before I even knew I was connected to it historically. But like the anarchist tendency in me is very critical of nationalism, and because it goes in fascistic directions. But you look at something like Gaza and Palestine, and it's like, why is a guy like me who hates flags waving a Palestinian flag around? Well, because nationalism in the moment that Palestine is in is a useful tool, and it is like the thing that is going to be useful to defend against the colonizer. And then you could argue afterwards, if there's a more dialectical process that gets them out of that then, some things happen. Everything is like Dune. Sometimes the person that liberates you is successful, and then they become the next enemy because they turn into a dictator, which is going to happen in this story. It happens all throughout this story. So dialectics is like important to have in mind the whole time. Also, with what you were talking about with like, people kind of tending and buying into fascism. Like, another reason I think this is important to talk about this stuff right now is because there's this big question that everyone seems dumbfounded by, like after Trump got elected, where they went like, why did so many Latinos vote for him? Because like there's these districts in Brownsville where a lot of this story takes place. There's these stories where they went, oh my God, these districts that were like heavily Democrat, they swung Republican what happened? And it's like, you think fucking brown people are just automatically on your side? No, what happened is the tragic loss of connection to where we came from, because that's the only way to understand that you are still a slave, that you're still disenfranchised. And fascism is the kind of, they're selling you this myth that you're not. You're doing great, and you're going to do even better as long as you buy into the system instead of getting out of it. And
I never thought I would. Sorry, I never thought I'd name check her in a good way, but like Paula Ramos, the journalist, wrote, I really liked her book Defectors, you know, and it's not perfect, but she does a really good job in Defectors, talking, interviewing and giving anecdotal evidence for different Latino subsections that voted for Trump or that were conservative for a variety of different reasons. And I remember going on John Fugelsang's show once, and you know, he brought me on, and it's a very lib show. I love John, and I think he's like whip smart, but it is super liberal. And he brought me on, and he was like, "Hey, Gabe, assuming, so tell me about how the Latinos are going to vote for this year." And I was like, "Thank you for making me the fucking face and spokesperson for all these Latinos." And I was like, "Actually, John, you know what? Most of them are not, because a lot of them came from either authoritarian countries." Where they actually wanted a strong man to like have law and order, or they came from leftist countries as refugees, and they miss that they've got problems with public schools and free and libraries, or they are very Catholic and they have very strong family values, or they're anti-abortion. So for a variety of different reasons, Latinos, you cannot expect to vote for Democrats.
Yeah,
you know?
it's a very infantilizing view, and it doesn't understand history and how any of this works. To just be like, oh, Latinos are always, you know, on the side of liberals, because that assumes that the Democrat is somehow at all the leftist. And I don't have to get into all that. This is the premise of the podcast. You probably know that if you're listening right now.
Yeah.
Another thing I want to touch on that's real goofy, actually, just to round out this intro, is you made me think about something that was surprisingly eye-opening for me, and it surprisingly opened my mind, which was last year I did a set at a comedy show as Cheech Marin. It was like a character type thing or whatever.
OG.
Yeah, and to prepare for it, I watched a bunch of Cheech Marin and I read about him and stuff, and I was like, what's this guy's deal? Like, what is his like oeuvre? Because everybody loves Cheech, but I hadn't thought about him in a long time.
Yeah.
And the funniest thing in the world occurred to me that says everything, which I hadn't really realized. It's like low-hanging fruit. It's right there, which is I realized like the entire joke of Cheech Marin, the character, is that Cheech doesn't speak Spanish, right? And like we have this inherited weird guilt about it, a lot of us that don't speak Spanish and stuff, but he is a Chicano, and he's one of those people that he's a really smart guy. He understands intellectually what Chicano is, and so he's playing on that when he has like that movie Born in East LA, where he's like in Mexico and they're like, where were you born, son? And they're trying to like keep him from going back to America, and he's like, I was telling you, I was born in East LA, because the phrase born in East LA is like, it sums up Chicanismo like so much, because you're not American, you're not Mexican, and more importantly, like you're saying, you're not like trying to move backwards, right? You're trying to like articulate like a new dislocation and a new thing in the process of what Mexican and Mexican Americans and Latin people and all this things, how we got here and stuff like that, and trying to think about it more usefully. And that helps you not, I think, become one of those Brownsville people that voted for Trump, is if you understand that and you're able to say that, because you know, we're in a precarious thing. Like, it's annoying having to walk through my life having to answer a question all the time, what are you, and not really having a thing to cling to. And then having these things now that I'm like, okay, you need to read a little bit before you understand this, but then, you know, we can talk about it. But I think it's a good tool. So understanding all that'll all play in here. But we're half an hour into the intro. I know where our brains are cooking. This is why I invited you, Gabe. You're a smart guy. I knew we were gonna fucking get into this. But let's tell the story a little bit. We're gonna kind of set the stage. It's gonna be a multi-part series, and today I think this is like just setting the table. We have to talk broadly about Mexican history to even get to the story. So I'm going to do that as quick as possible, but as thoroughly as possible, right? And feel free to interject at any time. We are doing that method of podcasting. I'm going to be the Marcus Parks for the episode. Okay, so let's talk about a brief overview of Mexican history to set everything up, right? So if you don't know, go back to high school with us right now. The 1500s, right? Conquistadors land on this continent. Hernandez Cortez, he lands in what is now Veracruz. In 1521, Spain conquers the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan and builds Mexico City on top of it. Also, I apologize for my fucking pronunciation, but history happened, and I'm relearning, Spanish that was not taught to me for assimilationist reasons. So I don't care.
Okay.
I'm gonna butcher stuff.
But when they get to Tenochtitlan,
Uh-huh.
the best. All right, immediately from all of the first-person accounts from the Spaniards, they're like the streets were clean, everything was geometrically shaped, everything was gridded. All of the districts were organized by like the products that they sold, and it was a wonder of the world. Like they lost their minds seeing this, and there was nothing comparable to Tenochtitlan in Europe at the time. Like even in the city of Venice, none of it could rival what was happening here. And it's only because these pesky fucking microbes that all these filthy ass Spaniards that didn't wash their asses were like fucking spewing out everywhere they went, that led to their inevitable victory. Guns, germs, and steel, baby.
Yep. Yeah. So the Mayan Aztec cities were like these intricate, well-planned things that history tragically tells you, oh, they're savage and whatever, and it's horrible, right? I went to Mexico City recently. I hung out in the Zocalo a lot, which is like the center of Mexico City, where the presidential palace and offices, the big cathedral is, and then also all these things that represent these big parts of this whole thing. But also there's tons of the ruins just still there, and they're being kind of preserved, like because someone eventually was like, we shouldn't destroy all this stuff. So just right in the middle, imagine like you're in Washington DC and there's just a city of the ruins like still kind of poking up out through the middle of it. It's real cool. It's tragic. Good.
Oh, let me tell you. Okay, so this was a coming to Jesus moment for me, and I'm hijacking this all because like one of my favorite specials is Richard Pryor, when he talks about coming back from Africa, and he's like, I went to Africa, and in Africa there were no like, he stops using the N-word, and this is his monologue about stopping using the N-word, because he's like, everyone was black, the janitors, the trash collectors, the politicians, everyone. And I saw that like that term was a term of wretchedness that was imposed upon me by the slave masters and by a white hegemonic culture. And so when I went to Mexico City, I grew up on the East Coast, man. And like I'm a Washington, D.C. Swamp thing. And I went to private schools with like the children whose parents worked at Blackwater, and like evil people. Okay. Like, that comic who's Jim Baker's her granddad. I know people like that in my life.
Who?
Rosebud Baker.
Talking about.
Oh, sorry. I thought you were talking about Tammy Faye Baker, like the televangelist. Yeah. Okay. Never mind.
But the point of all this is I go to Mexico City, and like I had this moment that Jake's having, and it was almost like a psychedelic experience where wow, Mexico City has Blade Runner skyscrapers, and it has ancient Aztec ruins. And then Teotihuacan is 45 minutes outside of the city, and it's a dead city that existed 500 years before the Aztecs even showed up. And so they had, it's like the Statue of Liberty in Planet of the Apes, where they show up and they establish Tenochtitlan, and they already see the ruins of a civilization that is crested and gone into disrepair. So like that sense of, and then on the street, people speaking Quechua. And I was like, wow, why did my consciousness about North America and our history start with these fucking wig wearing, wooden teeth or human teeth, slave owning basement rapists on the East Coast? Why did our history start with them talking about some fake democracy, where like there is so much richness and pride that can come from like seeing Mexico City as the center and heart of North America?
Yeah, it was Earth all along.
And I think it's It's the navel of I think it means the navel of the world.
Yeah. I
Old
mean,
as well.
So people who study it are navel gazers.
that's a good point.
My man. You got it.
Very well put. Mexico City, man. I mean, it's like it's the center of the world. It really is. It so the Zocalo. Okay, let's get back a little bit to setting the stage though.
Hernan Cortez.
We're gonna move past him. We've all been to high school.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe you haven't. I don't know if they teach this stuff everywhere, but if you're interested in further reading on the conquistadors, there's a lot out there. But more importantly, there is a Spanish War of Independence in 1821. This is fought mostly by Black, Indigenous, and like mixed race mestizos, and the point is to oust the Spanish. So let's talk about the caste system that exists a little bit, because like I said, Spanish came, they colonized. This happens in a lot of colonized places. There's a caste system that is racial, but then like, you know, the way Fanon puts it is like that's kind of it's like a cycle, like you're poor because you're black because you're poor, like it kind of continues to reproduce itself constantly. So it's also a class system, and everywhere you go at this point in history, or at this point of development in history, the white people are on the top of the caste system, the Black and Indigenous are on the bottom. And so in Mexico there were the criollos, which were a lot of them just straight up Spanish people who were like descendants or children or whatever of the, you know, the colonizers, but then they're born in Mexico and they're just part of the aristocracy and stuff like that. Then you have the large middle of the caste system, which is like the mestizos. Most Latin people you run into are a mestizo of sorts, and then there's every once in a while like, holy crap, this dude's like straight up indigenous, right? You see one of those guys on the side of the road that's like 4 feet tall and jacked, and he's dark skinned. You know, there's people that are still straight Mayan or Aztec or whatever.
Tarsican, Zapotec, Yaqui, Comanche, all these different groups, man. Mexico is full of vibrant, living indigenous communities that are comparable to the U.S., but in a lot of ways are still alive and thriving. And when we look at the racial makeup with the conquest moving from the east to the west among like the Protestants, Greg Grandin talks about this a bit in his most recent book. But, you know, for demographic reasons and religious, like Catholicism still saw everybody as a human. And it's not that the Spaniards weren't brutal, but a lot of more just Spanish men showed up. And so they, to establish themselves, continued to intermingle and marry into indigenous communities. So that's a rising of the caste system. And for a lot of like the Protestants that came in New England and or the Southerners, they didn't commingle with the natives. They just murdered them. Or like there were laws to keep people from going native because nobody wanted to work in the Jamestown colony. Anytime they were like, oh, fuck, and they ran off to go and join an Indian community, a native community, they would send patrols to go bring that person back and draw and quarter them in public to keep more of the conscripted, indentured servants from doing that. And then they would go and exterminate that whole tribe for harboring them because they did not want like any commingling between.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because something I've been thinking about reading about this the entire time is like there's this huge difference between like what happened north of the border and then everywhere that Catholicism, or that Spain went and brought Catholicism, because Catholicism functions differently, exactly as you put. And it's part of why the Catholic Church is so like such a huge player in this story, and as a thing in the dialectical, like, you know, liberation process thing to work against, but also like why that, you know, there's as a leftist who's like a Latino, there's always this thing where you're like talking to your friends and you're like, why does my abuela love the Catholic Church so much, if you understand the story of it being used to dominate us and control us a little bit? And it's like, it's complicated, right?
Yeah.
Because it also, I mean, it if you're going to tell the story all in one swoop, that is how to tell it, is that it's used as a weapon of social control. But it also, if you're living an individual life while that's happening, it is also offering you all this stuff while you're at the tip of a spear.
Gives you a
And
place to go. My grandma was
yeah,
Catholic, and she would say later on, she's like, I knew what they were doing with the priest and stuff, but she would still go to church because there's something to do.
they also like it folded in through the process of syncretism, like a lot of the stuff that people held dear from their own culture. So it has this like weird way of melding everything together as a way of selling it to you. My favorite story, I've told this on a podcast a long time ago. My favorite syncretism thing is Serpent Skirt, which is the Lady Guadalupe. She's a hardcore, crazy, like body horror monster demon thing, not like a weird human sacrifice god in the original.
Coatlicue is her name.
Yeah.
There's a statue to her in the archaeology museum in Mexico City, and she is a horrific, monstrous looking creature that's two serpents kissing at the top, wearing a belt of skulls. But she represents, she is the mother, and she melds perfectly with the ideas of the Virgin Mary. You know. And the one thing I wanted to bring up is like my leftism comes from liberation theology, which was, a strain of Catholicism before the latest Vatican II or whatever. But like this idea of like thinking of Jesus almost as a communist, or like when you think of Robin Hood and the Friar Tuck character in Robin Hood being what the church in its non-institutional form would be, like a spiritual leader for the poor. And my consciousness came from the Salvadorian refugees coming to DC after 1979, 1980 with the assassination of Archbishop Romero in El Salvador, because he was a spokesperson for that liberation theology. And the United States government allowed for the death squads in El Salvador to whack him. And, and that was the end of that movement. But liberation theology was all over Africa and all over Latin America as a catalyst for leftist revolt against the oligarchies.
That's really interesting. I don't get stuck on this, but you just sparked a seed in my brain. I'm going to think about it for a long time, because like there is this question. I mean, so much of like left stuff like Magone and Marx and stuff like that are really, really against organized religion. And then you have liberation theology come along. You go, how did that happen? And I think the how did it happen is the peculiar nature of certain religions like Catholicism as allowing themselves to like water themselves down to become part of the thing that they are controlling. And it becomes amorphous, and to the point you can turn it around against the thing in certain ways. That's really cool. Anyways, so the Spanish War of Independence happens in 1821, and after that, you got the caste system going, and the criollos, the white people at the top of it, their thing is that they don't want to have a liberal like society. They don't want to have what happened up with the gringos in the United States. There are, at this point in history, there's all these interesting things. There's stuff going on in France. There's stuff going on in like Gran Colombia and stuff, where there's let's use kind of this framework that's really been fleshed out by the Americans and stuff like that. And then you've got people that are like against that. It's new, it's scary, and they, as conservatives always do, they want to conserve. They want to go back. Like, no, that's too dangerous. And this happens. This is where people say stuff about us right now in history. No, that's too crazy. It's too rad. It'll never work out, right? That's always where, kind of liberal and conservative and left and right kind of stand. That's the nexus. So the conservatives really want to reinstate the church as like the fourth branch of government and have it control the government, basically, because they're convinced that everything will go crazy, Hobbesian nightmare if you don't have church in control of everything. So they briefly they do a coup and briefly install this guy Emperor Agustin Iturbide as the like emperor or whatever. And this we start to get into a period of instability where there's just like crazy coups left and right. But the first ones that happen are Iturbide, and then when they install this emperor, the liberals take up arms, they beat the conservatives, and they install Vicente Guerrero, who this is kind of argued about, but he might have been black. He might not have been. This might be a thing that people try to retcon, but he might have been the first black president on the continent. It's complicated. He might have been indigenous. People called him black. I don't know. I'm not going to make a claim because I don't, but sound off in the comments, I guess.
I'm an armchair historian, and the man was black and indigenous.
Sure. Have you ever met people that try to argue like Karl Marx was black and stuff like that? It's like I get what you're going for, but I mean, there's like pictures of him. I don't know, man. It would have been cool if he was.
There's an invisible version. You know, Mexico tried to bring together all of the races with this raza cósmica concept, which the critique of it, I like it because it is but I understand the critiques because the critique is that it invisibilizes the indigenous specificity and it invisibilizes the African diaspora and the people that were brought here in bondage. But like Mexico has a very invisible population of very proud black people, descendants of like the Yoruba and the slave trade in Veracruz specifically. And like I watched Henry Skip Gates's documentary series on Black in Latin America. And some of those traditional songs that were brought from Africa became La Bamba, right?
Whoa, I didn't know that.
And then Richie Valens comes down and he hears La Bamba with Richie and with his brother, played by Isai Morales in the movie. And then he brings that to the United States. And La Bamba becomes like one of the amino acid, the building blocks of like modern rock. And so when we say rock comes from black people, yes, and it also comes from Africans moving through Mexico and it being adopted by a Chicano, a proto-Chicano in Richie Valens, and then becoming the song that then white people listen to and they go, let's make songs like this.
Chris Garcia has a really good joke about La Bamba where he's like translates to English and he just kind of points out how weird it is that there's a part of a song that's just I'm a captain, I'm a captain, I'm a captain, I'm a captain. Yeah, yelling I'm a captain.
It's very aspirational,
Yeah. Okay. I made a really bad joke in my notes here. Let's talk about the black president of Mexico. It says, like the black guy at the beginning of a horror movie, he is assassinated and the story begins.
Okay. That's a lot better than I thought when you said you had a joke about the first black president. Where is this going? It's just like when Don Rickles went on Letterman when Obama was elected. It's like, the president's just going to be playing basketball. And everyone's like, what?
No. Oh, God.
I forgot about that. Oh, Don. Oh, Murray. Just joined me. Okay, so my black cat is in my lap
shout
now.
out to Gatos. Yeah, man. All about the cats.
Gatos El Blacko is the word.
That's not how you say it. Let's not say it. 1830 to 1870, there's this period of instability. It reminds me a lot of like when you talk about post-revolution Haiti, or there's just like coups left and right. There are like 50 presidencies in like 40 years or something like that. There's only 2 presidents that ever make it to the end of their presidency. There's tons of assassinations. There's people that are president like unconsecutively because it's just Game of Thrones. Everyone's just fighting to get on the thing. 1845, the U.S. annexes the Mexican state of Texas. That's how you should say it. 1846, Polk invades Mexico. President James K. Polk. And the Mexican-American War happens, the invasion. 1848, the expansion ends with modern borders that we have, largely because the U.S. government decides that it wants the land, but it doesn't want the people, because it refers to Mexicans as mongrels. And there's a lot of that stuff going on, race science and that sort of stuff around that time. So there's like, oh, we got this big land acquisition. Let's kind of call it here because we don't want to get involved, right? And then we start to see, as that thinking sort of continues, the beginning of like this more neoliberal method of extraction where they start to figure out we can just send business down there. But that doesn't happen if you don't have this fucker. Sorry, Grandma. Porfirio Diaz. I'm gonna put another quarter in the abuela cup. When I talk about this guy? Because during all this, there is this guy named Porfirio Diaz who starts off. He's born as like a peasant. He's this little peasant boy. He's in seminary. He's gonna be a priest or whatever. But then he meets some liberals. He meets Marco Perez. He meets and more importantly, he also meets Benito Juarez. Benito Juarez is the governor of Oaxaca. He's the first indigenous lawyer in Mexico. He's a Zapotec, and he's got dark skin. He's indigenous, but he's managed to rise and become this huge figure, right? And he also meets General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who, if you grew up in Texas and you had to learn about the Texas quote unquote revolution, you had to learn about this guy all the time. And he sucks, but it's more important to understand him in 3 dimensions rather than 2, which is how they taught us in Texas. He had one leg. He fought on both sides of everything, which is really funny to me. He's totally doesn't care, he's just a power player. He had been president 11 times during this period.
Damn.
And he, what else? In 1853, he seizes the presidency and he declares himself emperor. So he's just trying to throw back to that stuff. This is when he's doing conservative stuff, which is the way he puts it is Su Alteza Serenissima, which means the most serene highness. So he's insane with power, and he's gonna try to make himself, an emperor. Yeah. And Benito Juarez revolts against him by organizing a bunch of guerrillas, and in this process, Porfirio Diaz joins up and becomes a fighter, and that sets him on the path to becoming Porfirio Diaz. So he organizes a bunch of Zapotecs. He does all this interesting military stuff, and he turns out he has a knack for it because he's a meathead. Porfirio Diaz is weird because he becomes this liberal leader, but he kind of never really understands liberalism. He always kind of has a little bit of a despot in him, even when he's on the liberal side. He doesn't read much.
Dad, bro. He loved working out. He didn't like reading.
Yeah.
He was super agreeable, and people were like, "Yeah, I like this guy." He was kind of like the life of the party, and he just gave off this. I work out.
That's one of the funniest things about him to me is that they mention it a lot when you read about him, is that everywhere he goes, he builds a gym and he just loves pumping iron.
When is this? Could you even do that back then? They had gyms?
1857, yeah. There were big triangle weights and stuff, I guess. I'm not even sure what a gym looks like back then, but I mean, there's been gyms since ancient history. The Olympics come from ancient history and stuff. I'm just not sure what they looked like. I don't know if he's just picking up barrels and stuff or whatever. It looks like Donkey Kong, where everything is a barrel. That's
beating up an Irish orphan child.
Yeah. And I need to stop here and introduce a very important character. I don't have the exact information pinned down here. I'm gonna have to dig a little bit, but somewhere around here, I'm pretty sure this is true, that one Juan Jose Arredondo fought for Benito Juarez around this time, because we're going to meet him a little bit later, and he's old when we meet him later. So I know he was around this time, and I think that's part of his history. And he is my great grandfather.
Oh, nice.
And he will be a Magonista later. But part of his story is that he fought for Juarez and had the life of a military general or whatever the hell he was as he aged. And later on, he kind of gained some consciousness and realized that the Porfiriato was working against him and not for him, and became very dispossessed. And that's when he ends up becoming radicalized. But that happens later. So right now he's fighting for Juarez, and Juarez is a good liberal. People like him. He's considered a hero by a lot of people, at least at this point.
It's not going to end well for him.
Right, it's not. And he also later on he kind of sucks, but at least at this point he's he's the good liberal. He's kind of, while Diaz is not understanding what they're doing really and everything, he's actually kind of well read and stuff, and is trying to fix the country, at least in this one way in the process. So they win, right? They beat Santa Anna, and they form a liberal government. They establish a thing called the Ley Juarez and the Ley Lerdo, and these do things like ending church judicial privilege and banning corporate land ownership, and they make Benito Juarez the president. So in 1857, when they make Benito Juarez the president, they rewrite the Constitution. And the 1857 Constitution is a very important thing in this story. Everyone is always referring to it and arguing about whether it's dead or not. It's drafted by this guy Ponciano Arriaga. He ends the church's national religion status. He prohibits re-election. That's one of the most important things that the Constitution does, because people were abusing re-election and they don't want to have a dictator. It's a big liberal idea at the time, is, you know, we're going to fix things with having a government that has a perfect way of functioning. It solves all these problems, right? So putting that into the rules of your government, right? This is big liberal ideas. And they're good, but, you know, we'll get into picking this apart later. But there's no re-election, right? That's very important. And the reason I bring that up is because no one honors it later on in this story. Like, everyone just, you know, fuck you, I'm gonna get reelected anyway. All of this triggers a reform war. The conservatives go to war. They you know, they fight against the new liberal president, Benito Juarez. This is where Diaz does a lot of craft honing. He gets really good at fighting them. And
Nice.
he's fighting on the side of the liberals. He's honing his craft. He's becoming really good at military stuff. This guy's a strong suit. He's this weird strong man. And people start to notice that he's like kind of ruthless, though, for being someone who's technically on the good side here. It's like, whoa, yeah, he kind of like really killed the shit out of those Indians that we were fighting or whatever. And so people start to say stuff around about him, like, but like he does like a lot of stuff like you see in Israel now, like shoot and cry at the same time. Like, people say, like, I don't trust Porfirio. He will murder you while crying. That's how he's gonna do it. Because it's a lot of justifying like the brute force that he's using as like, we have to for the you know, for the rev or whatever, or for the liberal revolution. So they win the reform war, the liberals. The conservatives are now desperate. So they've been trying to reestablish the church rule over everything. They got beat by Benito Juarez and Porfirio Diaz, and then they go to Europe and just start begging all these monarchies and stuff to invade, or like empires and stuff like that, to invade Mexico. They literally go to other countries and they're like, please invade us. I know I've talked about this a little bit. I'm repeating myself. It's a very funny story, and we have to go over it again here to fit into the whole thing. But this is what happened here is Napoleon's nephew, Napoleon III, the one who Marx, you know, says history repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as farce. This is the farce. He's the only person that takes them up because the Monroe Doctrine is in place. The Monroe Doctrine is sort of acts as like a shield. The United States has essentially said, if you invade anyone in Latin America, you know, we'll stop you.
We have a monogamist. We have an exclusive relation with all these countries here that are in our sphere of influence. So we're the only ones that get to abuse them.
Yeah, right.
They're our primary, yeah.
It's like, it's not for good reasons. It's because the United States just wants to have control over, you know, all these places that they've colonized in Philippines and whatever. Yeah. But people at this point are afraid of violating that and getting into war with the United States. So the only person crazy enough to do it is Napoleon III, who invades Mexico. He attempts to invade Mexico, and his plan is to install an Austrian archduke named Ferdinand Maximilian Joseph Maria von Habsburg-Lothringen as Emperor of Mexico. And this is 1853,
an inbred Bonaparte, right? So it's like in when Michael Keaton is in Multiplicity and he continues to clone like versions of himself. And then as he continues to do that, they get like a little bit goofier and goofier. Or like in Gremlins Part 2, the new batch, where like you get the googly-eyed gremlin for no reason.
Yeah.
He's that. This
is one of the
a googly-eyed one.
He's a Habsburg. This is one of the late stage Habsburgs before they get recalled from history because they're getting too copy of a copy of a copy. He's a deep fried Habsburg. That's what he is. So, you know, those memes, deep fried memes where it's copied a bunch of times. Okay, so this results in the Battle of Puebla, which we just commemorated a couple weeks ago here in the United States, once again, as we always do, because we all understand that it's about the Battle of Puebla, right?
Cinco de Mayo, baby. I'm having mezcal today. Okay.
Oh, very fitting. Nice. So the Battle of Puebla happens, and that's Napoleon III invading and trying to install this fucking Habsburg. And It's a historic battle because they're an empire, so they probably should have won. But these guys are getting really good at fighting because they've had a lot of practice because of all this crazy stuff that's happened up until this point, and because Porfirio Diaz is hardcore, right? He's a military guy, so he emerges as like the hero of this battle. Like his unit is like the last one standing, and they managed to beat the French back. And at this battle, a guy named Teodoro Flores, who's fighting, meets a woman named Margarita Magon, who is like doing mutual aid stuff and handing out water and stuff like that. And they hook up, like they meet, and they're later gonna hook up. I don't know actually. They actually don't get married. There's oddly enough for them, most of the Magons don't end up getting married. The kids, it's because they're anarchists and they like don't believe in marriage. I don't know why their parents don't, but that's why they're called Flores Magon hyphenated, is because their parents they're not married. They're just hanging out. So yeah, Cinco de this is what Cinco de Mayo is a commemoration of. Every
Salud.
time you meet a white person celebrating Cinco de Mayo, you go, Battle of Puebla, huh? That's right. We all love it, you know. We're all really into Porfirio Diaz's victory over the Habsburgs. So this becomes Diaz's thing that he never stops talking about for the rest of his life, because it's good. Like, you know, you have to hand it to him. He really nailed it at the Battle of Puebla, and he's able to utilize his glory from that into, you know, leveraging it into having it like a dictatorship, basically. And so when I was in Mexico, I saw a museum with like a bunch of his stuff in it from the Porfiriato. And like one of the things he had that was really cool, honestly, but like totally tells this story, is he had a chessboard where one side was the French and one side was his, like, you know, his unit or whatever. It was a Cinco de Mayo chessboard, Battle of Puebla chessboard. It becomes this thing where, like, if you know him, you're like, dude, we get it, you know, you really killed him, but like, stop talking about it. They kill Maximilian by a firing squad, and his wife, Empress Carlota, is sent to a madhouse, which is pretty cool. They really, really beat the crap out of the French. It's pretty cool.
Sick. So she's like in the Suicidal Tendencies video. She's just like, I'm not crazy.
Yeah, I'm really an empress. In
and
Mexico.
They're like, calm down, Carlotta.
Yeah.
Carly.
Yeah, iCarly. So Diaz spends a few years in Congress. He's newly popular. He's got a political career going from this. And Juarez, who has been president through all this, right? He secured his presidency after being couped and stuff like that. He wins a third term. And by winning a third term, especially a third term, it's like, hey, what about the 1857 Constitution, right?
Yeah.
The one where you said we were going to, like, your Constitution, that we were going to say, we're going to establish this no re-election thing.
You're
so
no
Diaz,
FDR, buddy. He's no FDR.
Yeah. I feel like with his second election, you might have been like, he's FDR. And then like the third time, you're like, wait a minute, dude. This is kind of bullshit. So because this happens, Diaz starts to kind of turn against him, and he runs against him first for president on the ticket of no re-election. And Juarez beats him, and Juarez starts to become kind of authoritarian, and he has like this system of what are called jefes políticos, which are like political bosses who do a lot of his dirty work, and you see the well kind of get poisoned here. And so now we have Diaz in the situation of being the guy who's trying to like stop that, and you kind of go, okay, Diaz, like, cool, right? But he runs against him in 1871, he loses again, and then he decides, okay, it's time to do a coup. So he goes and he gets his brother Felix to organize some troops. But the thing about Felix is Felix has been like the governor of Oaxaca at one point, but he like really pissed off a lot of Zapotecs, because at one point he was in some battle when he fought for Juarez, I think, and he like burned this effigy of a patron saint in a village that he was taking over. And like, you do not do that to, you know, you're gonna get hit with like deeply offended to some people. And
this is why culture matters.
Yeah. So what happens? He came around. So when he's fighting for Diaz, he runs into the same Zapotecs. They kind of like went after him specifically, and they're like, "That's that guy who burned the thing in the middle of town." And they find him and they shave the soles of his feet off and like make him walk around a bunch. And then eventually they just cut his feet off. It's all very feet centric for some reason. Don't ask me. And they kill him. And so Diaz is like, okay, like we're not going to use Felix for this. He's really pissed off now. And he's about to just stage a coup against Benito Juarez. And then Benito Juarez just dies of old age. So when Benito Juarez dies, he quits the coup and he goes, okay, well, I'll run against his vice president, Lerdo de Tejada, and Tejada wins. And then he does a re-election. Everyone's just breaking the re-election rule. And finally, he goes, okay, I'm going to do a coup against this guy. And it's going to look justifiable because he just broke the re-election rule. And Diaz gets elected. Or he does a successful coup or whatever. No, I'm sorry. I said that wrong. This is actually a pretty important detail. I think he runs under no re-election and he wins. And so he wins running under the banner of no re-election. And then he's president for 35 years from then on. It's like, what is it, like 7 consecutive terms or something weird like that?
It's kind of like when Joe Biden was like, if you vote for me this time, trust me, I'm going to be a one-term president. And he was correct. But
that's a good point. He didn't lie.
Anyway, this is not the Diaz. Diaz does not do that. Continue.
Yeah. So then this ushers in the era referred to as the Porfiriato, which is his unending presidency, right? So he really takes advantage of some stuff that's already been established. That's important to kind of understand as we think about this, because you can't pin it all on one person. That's like great man theory is going like, well, Diaz was like a really bad guy, and he was, but the jefe politico system was already around, the jefatura, because of Juarez. And this is how liberalism as a process like continues to set up the things that become authoritarian and fascistic and stuff like that, right? So the jefe politicos, they're basically his goons. It's political boss stuff. There's lots of like sexual abuse. There's lots of like graft, fines. What was that, like racketeering or whatever? You just have to pay them off for stuff. He has these people called the rurales, who are like his goons, his Gestapo, basically, his like almost like the Texas Rangers up north. He has a faction. Yeah. The secret police, basically, the rurales. And sometimes not so secret because he's got so much power, they don't have to be. And there's this like really important faction within his regime that, if you're looking at this historically, it's been picked apart a lot. The Cientificos, who are like these technocrats that are a big part of his dictatorship. During his dictatorship, he rapidly industrializes Mexico. So he has like a lot of people that are very technocratically minded, because that, depending on how you look at it, I mean, there's benefits to it. There's good things that came out of it. It's just that it dispossessed everyone in the process. So I don't know, interesting thing to look at and go, when you see people that are running as technocrats within like our government, you go, okay.
Bukele in El Salvador, kind of with this patina, this veneer of being kind of like an entrepreneur techno boy, instead of wearing military garb, right? Or I think about like the Chicago boys that were sent throughout Latin America in the late 70s and early 80s, who were the technocrats that established free market neoliberal economic patterns in like places like Chile. But what they promised was, well, we're going to have efficiency, we're going to bring technology, we're going to bring railroads, right? So like we're seeing echoes of that and these patterns, and you can see it here in Porfirio Diaz, right? And
Elon is a Cientifico,
Doge,
100%. tech, just without specifying the purpose of it, just the very idea of like rationalist thinking and stuff like that. That's kind of what the Científicos are. The biggest, kind of most prominent one is the finance minister. Limantour is his name. He shows up a lot. Jose Yves Limantour, I think his name's Jose. But he's Porfirio Diaz's like right hand man throughout all of this, and he uses him a lot because finance is like his main weapon, is what he uses to kind of establish Mexico for what it is. And the Porfiriato, there's a military faction in the regime that's like kind of against the Científicos. I don't even know how to get into like why that is, but Bernardo Reyes, who'll come up later, is like this big general that's part of his like military apparatus that kind of, I guess their philosophy is like, nah, let's just take over everything or whatever. Whereas the Científicos are like kind of doing proto neoliberal stuff. We're like, no, we'll do trades, and it doesn't even have to get bloody. So he starts to expand the definition of libel to just mean criticizing him and his government, makes it illegal to criticize him. And he is still got this big ego. And so his signature move for like establishing, also part of this is like he establishes a cult of personality around himself. And this is all done with people still kind of seeing him as a hero, right? Because he hasn't really gone off the deep end yet. And he's sort of like riding on this, I'm a liberator thing. I beat the French and all this stuff. So one of his big things is giving out people like signed pictures of him, and you just see them in like every shop and restaurant and house or whatever is a signed picture of Porfirio Diaz. He married his niece, but she died in childbirth after having a bunch of miscarriages, and like a bunch of their dads were like, a bunch of their kids were like incest kids and died and stuff. So he had this weird, I don't know, all of the aristocracy back then,
echoes of the Habsburgs.
For real. It's like you beat him and then you just played his game anyway. Like, why?
That's what happens. Systems of oppression replicate themselves,
Totally. So. He remarried. He marries a woman he meets at the home of the U.S. ambassador, because he's starting to do a lot of like what do you call it? Diplomacy with the United States. And she's like this young Criollo woman from an upper class family, and they use that to really like try to win everyone over. Look, we squash the beef, right? I'm brown, she's white. I'm poor, she's rich. I'm American, she's kind of got Mexican, or I'm a Mexican, she's kind of got like American parts of her family.
Opposite attract.
Yeah, they do the whole like dance about it. Yeah, he's the cat. Yeah, she's Paula. He's MC's cat. She so this becomes a PR tour that they travel around, and because they're in the wake of like the Mexican-American War, like the invasion and everything. He sort of establishes diplomacy with all of these members of the United States ruling class, and he sort of goes like, look, that was then, this is now, things are better. I'm your guy, like I'm gonna make it cool on both sides. And he's selling out his country in a lot of ways because it's a power grab for him, but it's seen as diplomacy. So he's treated in the press in the United States as like the great civilized leader of this unruly land. And because they have this great guy who's conveniently doing a lot of deals with like American capitalists, he's finally tamed. He's look at him. He eats with a fork and knife. She had to teach him to eat with a fork and a knife. She had to teach him not to spit on the floor and stuff, because he's like a peasant who just like went through all this stuff. And he has this whole image thing happen, this whole PR thing where he's like, yeah, no, he's this great master politician, and that's why United States should forgive the war and everything, and like we got this cool guy in now and he's gonna take care of it. It's very interesting, like spin, I guess is how I would put it. So he inherits all this debt because of the period of instability. He solves this by dispatching some agents to buy it all up in Europe. He becomes like really tough on crime. He starts to do all this stuff, right? He puts the iron ring on the barrel and holds everything together. He rapidly industrializes Mexico, and he connects the global economy to all of these Gilded Age capitalists that all of the names ring a huge bell, right? There's like JP Morgan, Guggenheim, someone named Grenville Dodge, Collis P. Huntington, Henry Clay Pierce, George Hearst is very involved in this era, where he with like finding oil down there and stuff. Rockefeller, obviously, Edward Doheny. George Hearst is like, if you ever watched Deadwood, he's William Randolph Hearst's grandfather. He was an oil man, and he like, just went around and dominated the continent as it was still being sort of established in ways like this, and made sure to get the extractive pipes of capital like set up while all this stuff is happening. Killed a bunch of people in the process. He's there. He's cutting deals, right? There's also kind of a come up for the Mexican Criollo ruling class. There's like the Terrazas, and most importantly, there's this family called the Maderos, right? Madero, we'll get to him later. He's like a big player in the Mexican Revolution, and he's kind of a weird liberal who's like on the side of revolutionaries, and he's also a spiritist and does tarot cards and shit. It's fucking crazy. But his family gets super rich off of this. And yeah, we'll talk more about him later, or I guess later in the series. So I want to stop here and talk a little bit about neoliberal extraction, like, because this turns into the situation where the country of Mexico is sort of seen as like it's called the treasure house of the Americas. And to me, the massive untold story of Mexico is that through this specific process, like 80% of people are dispossessed from their land, because most people are like farmers and stuff like that. And as he makes these deals to expand railroad lines and stuff like that, the land is literally, that didn't belong to anyone, is made to belong to these people north of the border. And in that process, the people who farm off of it for their own subsistence become like employees of people they've never met and have nothing to do with. And that establishes this relationship that ultimately leads to like company towns. It leads to this massive manufacture, but no one is manufacturing like anything for the people of Mexico. It's all going away. It's all being extracted. Food, people are starving. Food's not being produced. Clothes aren't being produced. And that permanently sets up the relationship between the United States and Mexico. It's
I would like
80%
to like
of a country.
It seems like all of these railroads that are being, instead of the United States continuing the settler colonial project through sending people down to homestead, now we've got a strong man in charge. So we've got a top cop in Porfirio Diaz, who is like the military strongman with the secret police. You have the landed elite, which are the criollos, and instead of it being the U.S. government itself that conquers the land, it is him making deals with private corporations who then extract all of Mexico's wealth and drive it up into it, like sucks it up like a vampire into the U.S. So the U.S. history is inextricably tied to the wealth, the lifeblood of Mexican resources. So
This is
we've
why
always been part of the
Good.
U.S., right? But
Yeah.
without, like, the U.S. could not exist without Mexico's raw materials and the exploitation of the Mexican peasants, even the ones that don't immigrate to go and work as gardeners, or that go and work in the slaughterhouses outside of Chicago. Like, we've always been the United States' fucking little blood bag.
We're a blood bag, exactly like that guy, Brian, what's his face? Johnson, not Thompson. He's a blood bag too, though, if you think about it. But like this is, I really get stuck here. I mean, like, this is the most important thing that no one understands, because you will talk to people throughout your life who are utterly convinced that states operate in competition with each other like a game of fucking Mario Kart, and someone is just further down than someone else, and we started off, or even like, oh, we start off on third base. That logic isn't even perfect either, because it's like, no. We're a organ. Like, we exist in relation, and life in the imperial core is only good because you can squeeze people so harder in this secret far off place that no one here thinks about and stuff. And that's what neoliberal extraction is. This is what Lenin wrote about when he was talking about imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism and stuff like that. This and just when people talk about the third world, or they talk about Mexico and say like, oh, it's like a dirty place or whatever, or it's not as caught up as us up here or whatever. This is
I would
permanent
I would compare the what happened in West Virginia and the Appalachians and the coal miners there, or the coal miners in Wyoming, or anything that happened along the Rocky Mountain spine, right? All of that was company towns, and all of that was sort of extractive resources. So like anybody who's just a student of North American history or US history, you can look at these exploited areas that we considered states, but were really are like internal colonies. And Mexico, what's happening in Mexico is that to a greater magnitude, right? And it's also racialized.
Yeah, and like Mexico, like the way by the way, I should have said this up top, but I have like two major sources that I'm using throughout this. I'll put this in the notes or whatever. But really good book, Bad Mexicans by Kelly Little Hernandez. I've talked about a lot of the show. This is, I think she tells the story in a way that's really easy to understand and delivers these concepts really well. She puts it as, the way she says it that I think is really cogent is just that like, there is no United States without Mexico, like historically. That this does not exist without that, and Mexico doesn't exist without the United States. This life here would not be exactly the same had not this massive dispossession happened. So you can't really put out of sight, out of mind logic to this or whatever. And it's very important as politics in the here and now, progressives, to understand this and to take this into account when you listen to Trump do all this tariff stuff and say, oh, we're just going to go back to that or whatever. And if if you're someone who's like, you consider yourself like a leftist, like a socialist or a communist or an anarchist or something like that, you need to think about stuff internationally. You need to be an internationalist. The limits.
We all need to be Chicanos, baby.
Yeah, right. The social democracy thing from like the Bernie era, where it kind of stops at like, we're going to make stuff better here and it's in your own self-interest. It's going to be better for you to have free healthcare and stuff like that. There's a limit there. And we're past it. Like there's no point. There's no Bernie anymore. There's no reason to like just try to go around and trick people into thinking that socialism is the state. It's just within the boundaries of our state. And it's just about making life better here or whatever. The quality of life exists in permanent relation to quality of life elsewhere, and the only way out of this is permanently liberating the working class, not becoming fucking Norway or whatever. And also another book that I'm using is called Dreams of Freedom. It's a Magone reader. It's really good. And I'm drawing from a lot of other places as well. We'll talk more on the show about that. But let's get to the story. I'm going to get us through the beginning here because we're just going kind of long. But we'll get to the midpoint here, and then or the stopping point. It's not the midpoint, but we'll get to a thing, and then we'll take a break, and we'll do it all again in a couple weeks. So, the Porfiriato, right? Everything is set up. This is all happening. This guy, the Mob Deeb, right? He was just our friend. Now he's got a huge worm, and he's killing us with it, right? I don't know. I haven't finished the Dune books, but like, everything's in place, and you got these guys who are still kind of wrestling with ideas of liberalism, just hanging around. So there's this guy named Camilo Arriaga. Camilo Arriaga is the nephew of Ponciano Arriaga. I can't remember his name exactly. The guy who authored the 1857 Constitution. Arriaga is like holding conferences and stuff like that and having reading groups in San Luis Potosi. And he's been reading Marx and Bakunin and like passing his books around, and he's weird because he's kind of like from an establishment background, but he gets a little radicalized, and part of that is like so many intelligentsia and people we know and everything. He's downwardly mobile, right? Things are getting worse even for him, so he's starting to ask questions. He's highly educated, and he's a fucking white guy, and he's been dismissed from like positions by Diaz himself, just for criticizing him. And he kind of goes like, what the hell? Like, you can't even criticize this guy. What is this? Right. He starts to figure out what's up. So he has this conference, and at the conference, a bunch of people show up who are going to be part of like the Suicide Squad. That is, the group from here on out. It's so cool. It's a lot like the bad Mexicans. Yeah. Which is what Porfirio Diaz came to call this group of rebels. Rebel writers is another thing that they're called a lot, because they all are propagandists. Like, they do other stuff, but their main thing is they all know each other because of meeting up and talking about their little newspapers that they're running that are all flirting.
They're ill with the quill, son. they're like epic shit posters. This is it. We got the Reddit boys assembling.
One might even say they're like podcasters. So there's a guy named Librado Rivera. He is a school teacher. He's like quiet, he's kind of meek. It's like, what is this nerdy guy doing here? He's talking about criticizing the president, but he's like a professor. What? He's really cool. He's true blue. He stays with Magon the whole damn time. There's a guy named Juan Sarabia, who, I'm just going to put this out there. He looks like Scott Cease, the guy from the TikToks where he's like, works at IKEA, and he's like, you want to talk to the manager? I don't even care. I am the manager. Whatever the hell he says. He's a young guy, and he looks like Scott Cease. Not a insult, but he's a young kid who fell into poverty, and he got caught up on all this stuff, and he meets Arriaga, and he starts to gain some consciousness. So there's this growing bubble of consciousness, right? And he eventually becomes the editor of Arriaga's magazine, which is called Rebirth, or it's called Renacimiento, which is Rebirth in English, which is also the name of a really good video game I played last year, FF7 heads. Everything also in this story is all called like Rebirth and this and regeneration. We'll get to that, but it's all very cool. These people are so dramatic. Like, this era of history, especially these radicals, everyone as they're dying like recites a poem about bullets and shit. It's so fucking cool. So everything is like that, because these are these radical intellectuals, right? There's a really cool character in this named Juana Belén Gutierrez de Mendoza. So she is an autodidact from the mountains. She's the daughter of a blacksmith, and she never knew her own birthday, because that's like a common peasant thing, I think, if you're just not born into like the system. So she had to make one up because she got arrested so many times for agitating and stuff like that. She was like very similar to like a lot of the characters in the IWW up north of the border. She would advocate for mine workers. She was married to a miner. She had kids and stuff, and she saw the conditions, and she was really smart, and she's self-taught. So really cool detail about her is that whenever Juana Belén Gutierrez de Mendoza was arrested, she had to make up her birth date, and then also on the booking form where it said to write your name, she wrote in all caps, Sedición-Rebellion. Sedition, rebellion, like as her fucking name. Insane, right? She published an anarcho-feminist magazine called Vesper. That's her podcast. She later on, after all this, she ends up being a prominent figure in Emiliano Zapata's like forces in the further revolution. But her story is kind of untold, right? There's a guy named Lazaro Gutierrez de Lara, who is, they say he's like movie star handsome, and he's like from a really prominent family, and he could have easily had like a totally cush establishment life. But he was handed a job as a circuit judge in this place called Hakeem. And when he got there, he saw the devastation that the Diaz government rained on the Yaqui Indians, right? So there's this tribe called Yaqui that, like, I think in northern Mexico, they existed, and their land was dispossessed and sold to these railroad companies and stuff like that. And they're still operating, in their untainted way, right? They're still in like primitive communism, and they start to like lay down these railroad tracks and tell them, you're going to work for this railroad company owned by whoever up north, right? And so they have this hero who's called Kaheme, which means one who does not stop to drink water. And he has this heroic battle where he fights off the Diaz troops, and he creates this like huge like system of like guerrilla forts within the trees and stuff that no one can figure out how to infiltrate, and they just get killed as soon as you look at it and stuff like that. And it's really cool, right? But eventually Diaz wins, and eventually they kill him by firing squad, and the Yaqui become dispossessed farmers, and they rebel a little bit further, and eventually they just rebel so much that what Diaz does is he creates this system of rounding them up and deporting them to the Yucatan Peninsula to work as essentially chattel slaves. Like, it's all the way down there in the bottom, so it's like no one's really looking at it, and he straight up just forces like chattel slavery on the Yaquis, and it's like an untold thing. They'll come up way later or whatever, but it's a really tragic piece of history.
It reminds me of like the Trail of Tears, or any other place where you internally create refugees, and like an easy way to dominate people, especially indigenous people, is to move them from their ancestral lands to some other place.
Yeah,
right. So they lose connection with like where they're from. And we had that happen all over the United States too. So this is like a story that is very much applicable to like traditional U.S. history.
I was walking around here in like LA a while back. I was in like East LA somewhere, and I saw like a really cool Yaqui Indian like airbrush thing on the back of someone's fucking truck, So like this identity, this culture has been attempted to be erased and obliterated, like you're saying, but it's really cool to see people still walking around. Sorry, truck was going by. Okay. There's a guy named Antonio Diaz Soto y Gama. He's a young lawyer. He's a young lawyer who's also a poet. There's a lot of really poetic characters in this. I really like this guy because he's a lawyer and a poet. And he's been arrested for doing stuff like chanting death to Porfirio Diaz, right? Most of these people haven't really gone as far as to say stuff like that because it's illegal. So there's a lot of like just sort of being vague or criticizing like the corrupt people in the Diaz government, but not coming out and
saying. You're saying no one's saying what we're all thinking yet.
Except for this next guy.
It just says what we're all thinking.
Literally, that trope is like, it's about Ricardo Flores Magón is like a truth teller comedian. He is like, I'm gonna say it because no one's saying it. He comes from so he came from Teodoro and Margarita, right? They had 3 kids. He has an older brother named Jesus who publishes this paper called El Democrática. He brings Ricardo to a no re-election march because these no re-election marches are starting to happen, right? People are starting to get out in the street. And Ricardo, when he's 18 years old, he goes to one of these things. He's trying to speak. He's very vocal. He gets a cop's gun barrel shoved in his chest, and it pisses him off so hard that it creates like one of the world's angriest anarchists, right? Every anarchist has an origin story, right? Where it's like kind of personal, and he's like, those gun barrels, man, like they made me, because I was trying to talk. And he's really pissed off that he was being silenced, which is why he becomes like just someone who never stops like agitating, creating content after that. And that he becomes an anarchist later, but that's a path. So all of this starts off very liberal. Liberalism is the starting point for a lot of these people because they're seeing the Porfiriato as like, this is also really important, I think. They're seeing the Porfiriato as a corruption of liberalism, a system that works, right? And you see this all the time now with people going like, no, the problem is Trump. Trump's super evil, right? And it's like, well, okay, well, let's talk about the system that created Trump and allowed him to be there to begin with. And if you cut his head off, does a different snake's head grow back? Like someone else will be able to do this. But everyone's still kind of in this part of the journey at this point where they're like, Porfirio Diaz is really evil. And we want to like, liberalism is being failed is the way I think that they start off looking at it, right?
We can reform it, man. If we just get the right guy in the right position of power then all of the norms and institutions we have in place, we can really just streamline them and clean them up. You know, it's the hypocrisy that's the problem. But like the rules to the game that we're all playing, those are great rules.
Yeah, I know, right? We just got to make a really good constitution. So, a radicalizing factor for both the Magone brothers, or both of them, I guess there's three of them. I guess Enrique probably is included in this. He's the third one. He's the youngest one. Or probably a radicalizing factor was that their father, who fought for Diaz, if you remember, he moved them all to Mexico City. And he's like, great, this guy I fought for, he's the president now, right? I'm sure he'll give me a job and he'll remember me and he'll help me out. So he wrote Porfirio Diaz a letter. And you know what he got in return? A fucking signed picture of Porfirio Diaz, right? Not even an answer. He's just, oh, send them more fan mail. It's another fan of mine, right? Total headliner bullshit, right? Jim Norton did that to me. But I didn't write him a letter. He gave me one, the headshot. Here, you want this, kid? I'm sure you do. Fucking care about Jim Norton's face. But anyways, so they start to realize, like, oh no, this guy doesn't give a shit about us, right? So eventually Teodoro dies and Margarita moves the family to this really poor neighborhood called Arcos de Belém. And it's in a neighborhood right next to this thing called the Belém prison, which will play a role in the story. It reoccurs a lot because it's like a notorious dungeon prison, right? The Belém prison is like, there's 3 stories. The top story is the one where, like, it's called like it has a name, I can't remember, but it's like if you're like a notable person, they go, okay, you can be in the top part. If you're like street trash, you go into the basement. The basement's a dungeon. The first time they go to Belém prison, because they're like protesters, they get put in the top part, but they end up in the basement later. So Jesus's paper Democratica publishes a story about the displaced Yaquis and Mayos in northern Mexico who left Hakeem for this place called Tomochic, right? And in Tomochic, all of these displaced Yaquis and Mayos, they meet this teenage curandera named Teresa Urrea or Teresita, and she's like, you know, they say she can cure cancer and blindness and stuff and stroke and whatever, and she just becomes this huge celebrity, like to the point they call her the Saint of Cabora. And Diaz hates her because all of these people that represent sort of like there's like different kind of factions happening here. There's different, like, some people are like really Catholic or whatever, but there's a lot of indigenous people that have not really been taken under the yoke of Catholicism. They haven't really been like dominated by it. They're still like clinging to their actual, you know, original religions and cultures and stuff like that. So there's a lot of indigenous people that love Teresita. And in 1892, a parish priest in Tomochic tries to excommunicate her, and the whole town just like uprises around it, and they just exile him from the town, and they declare the town a sovereign community independent of the Catholic Church and the Diaz regime, and they do like a Rojava or like a Chaz or something like that. And Diaz calls her the most dangerous girl in Mexico because of this. So he orders the town to be burned down, which they do, which causes her to flee in exile to the United States.
Very Gaza vibes. Just burn the whole town.
Yeah, and Tomochic is eventually sold to the Wisconsin Cargill Lumber Company by Jose Limantur, the finance minister. So
call back.
Yeah. Publishing this story lands Jesus in jail for 9 months, and he, you know, writes home and stuff like that when he's in jail. But this begins the process of them being in Belém prison like over and over and over again. So let's go back to Magone a little bit. Magone, he's like this young cut up guy. He's, you know, hooligan. He's up to no good, right? He's supposed to be doing his job, but he likes, you know, screwing around. And his brother convinces him to get a job in like a printing thing. He's like a printer's assistant, and that sparks an interest in journalism for him. So it starts to get him on his path. In his early 20s, he drops out of law school. He drinks a lot. He gambles. He whores around. He starts a bunch of failed businesses. And in the process, though, he befriends sex workers. Probably a client of them, and he's probably like a type of guy who goes, but I see you as a human. Let's hang out and have a conversation. And he starts to have these, the experiences where he's living like this, like really like cut like a he's like a dirtbag, right? But he's in the process of being a dirtbag, like meeting all these what do you call it, lumpen proletariat. He's meeting a lot of itinerant laborers, people that are getting arrested for vagrancy and stuff like that. And he has kind of this eye-opening journey where he starts to put together what's going on and why there is an underclass and why there is a lumpen proletariat and stuff like that.
Like his own motorcycle diaries.
It's very Che, yeah. He sees the rurales, he sees the Yucatan pipeline stuff like that. And they say around this time he became sterile from an STD, and they don't say which one it is, but I bet it's syphilis. It's era appropriate, and it makes people sterile. In 1889, though, he quits drinking. He comes home and he yells at his brother. He says, "Paper is an idol to me," like it's his god or whatever. And he says, he's had this like massive, consciousness explosion. And he realizes he has a mission in this world. So he starts dressing in black. He becomes this like bohemian intellectual. He learns a bunch of scraps of different languages like Nahuatl, Portuguese, Italian, French, Latin, stuff like that. And, he looks like an Emma Goldman type person with his little pince-nez glasses and stuff like that. He becomes the Ricardo Flores Magón that history knows. And most importantly, he reads a bunch of theory, and his favorite is Peter Kropotkin. So he starts to understand things through the lens of anarcho-communism. In 1900, him and Jesus launched this their rag, their paper. It's called Regeneración, and it calls for a regeneration, which is what that stands for, of the principles of the 1857 Constitution. And it has an office in the Zocalo and stuff like that. But that's our main thing, is like we're regenerating this like dying thing, right? And at first they're very careful not to mention Diaz. They call themselves an independent legal journal because you can get arrested for that, and because they're like ideologically inching there. It's like taboo, right? It's like, are we really gonna say kill the president? Like that sort of thing where you go, can I say it out loud? I remember like, being a young leftist, the first time I was like, you could go through a battle in your mind being like, am I going to call myself a socialist in Texas? I don't even know if I am, you start to grapple with those ideas. So they're on that journey, right? Where they're doing all this. They write about various corruption of like other people in the government. They start to get, closer and closer to saying it. And in December of that year, they rebrand from being an independent legal journal to an independent journal of combat. And they start to actually do it, right? They start to do like satirical articles about monarchy and stuff like that. They become really popular as this happens, and they start to get a bunch of subscribers in Mexico and in the United States. And like in Mexico, for example, literacy is only like 28%. So people are like getting it and then standing on like a barrel or whatever and like reading it to a bunch of people in their town corner or whatever. And it becomes this thing like word of mouth. People start to develop consciousness. Like, yeah, wait a minute. I thought that might be what's going on, but you kind of don't really allow yourself to think things sometimes until you start talking about it with other people. So there's a lot of, I'm not going to say idealism. I know it's like as materialist, it's like a dirty word in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of like class consciousness stuff going on here. A lot of propagandizing.
Your thoughts become words, and the words become reality. Thoughts
and they become bullets.
Yeah.
Sort of.
Dum-dums.
So let's see. We're almost there. Sorry, I like the story a lot, so I have too many notes. But we're almost there. We're almost there. I promise. So Camilo Arriaga notices this, and he invites them to this thing he's holding. He's having this thing called the Conference of Liberals in San Luis Potosi, and Ricardo Flores Magón goes to meet Camilo Arriaga, and when he meets him, Arriaga said he went into his library and he pointed at the Constitution, because Arriaga has the Constitution in his library, or a copy of it or something, and he points to it and he yells, "The Constitution is a dead letter," right? And that becomes like one of his things, is declaring the Constitution is dead. You know, don't listen to Diaz, right? He killed the Constitution. So like, I found this really cool illustration in Mexico of him as like a punk with like liberty spikes and shit, and it says "La Constitución sigue muerta," remains dead. It's like his catchphrase or whatever. So eventually they start to talk about, you know, what is to be done here, and he kind of does the "I think we're gonna have to kill this guy" cartoon. Like, he's like talking about Diaz, and he's like, no, he's not gonna cede power. He's starting to understand power doesn't just give itself up, right? And this is what gets him a little bit more radical than the liberals. So back at the conference, when it was Ricardo's turn to speak, he took the stage and he did something no one had the nerve to do up until that point, even in the conference. He broke the taboo, right? He transgressed the norm. He's an iconoclast. He attacked the Porfiriato out loud. He called the Porfiriato a den of thieves. He starts yelling, "The Porfiriato is a den of thieves." Everyone starts booing him, right? And he's like, basically he's Bill Burr in that clip where he's like getting booed by Philadelphia and he turns it around, you know? He just keeps going, "The Constitution is a den of thieves." And everyone's like, "Boo!" Ah! And they get a little bit quieter. And as they get quieter, he yells it a third time. He goes, the Constitution. He goes, "The Porfiriato is a den of thieves." And they've gotten quiet. And then someone's like, "Yeah." And then it turns into like raucous applause. This is the hardest thing to do in all of performing, right? He turns a massive boo around into like a standing ovation, and everyone's like, "Yeah, he's right." But they've never had anyone say it like that before, you know? So he has this huge moment at this liberal conference where he's like, "We're gonna fucking take him down." Like, it's a den of thieves, and the revolution is born in like that moment. Okay, I think we should stop here because we're at about 2 hours, and there's more. There's a lot more. So
Yeah,
I'm gonna put a pin in this.
Gave el grito. This is an echo of what Hidalgo did. You know,
Right.
this is the cry again. You know, and somebody had to say it. We were all thinking it. This is it. The catalyst, right? He lit the match.
He's a total comedian. Like, there's no. It's the parallels are too stark. I'm sorry. He did Bill Burr in Philadelphia. He's a total, like, he's annoying. Like, he's throughout his life, his friends are like, "Yeah, I mean, I agree with him most of the time, but he's kind of takes it too far. Like, he's kind of annoying, you know." He won't compromise ever. And he's just like, I mean, we'll get into it as we continue the story, but he's like not really a great warrior. His thing is like fighting with his mind like this. And his thing is speaking in words and stuff like that. So this is really the birth. When we were going through all of Mexican history, and you're right, I skipped over the Cry of Dolores, but that's part of it. It's in there. There's plenty of stuff to read about it. But yeah, so this sets into motion a series of events that none of anything that's happening and has happened. It happens without Magón, without this happening. It's a great
you set up
story.
all the dominoes. All the dominoes have been set, and this is like this moment at the conference is what's going to start tipping them over, and we don't know how everything's going to land. Right?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's so good. It's insane. Like, all of our faves show up.
Even the problematic ones.
Yeah. But tune in next time. Keep listening to the show. Keep an ear out. because we'll do part 2 and I'm sure part 3 and maybe 4. I don't know how long this is going to take to get through. And I'll probably keep talking about this on some level forever. I'm going to try to get the author of one of the, probably Bad Mexicans if I can get a hold of her on the show at some point. I don't know. This is a thing that's like with me for life, so I'm going to keep talking about it, but I thought I'd try to turn it into a thing, and I think we did a pretty good job here. Gabe, thank you so much for joining us. You had excellent takes and insight and jokes, and I'm glad we booked you, and we'll do it again. Where can people find you?
Man, it was thrilling to be here. You can find me at Halal Cartels. That's my podcast with my co-host Samir Nassim, Halal Cartels. And we're just two brown dudes living in the center of the empire, talking shit about American culture from, the lens where we feel like we are normal and everyone else is crazy. And we believe in third world liberation and constantly critique the impending doom that our financial systems and economic and agricultural systems and real estate and all that stuff is leading us to. So it's a lot of doom, but sometimes it's not all gloom. We like to have some bloom in it too, and we love talking about history as well and possible alternative futures.
How about a plume?
A plume, yes. Ooh, yeah. Blah 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 blah. Plumes. Smoke.
Check out Halal Cartels. It's a very good podcast. And follow Gabe. Anders, you got anything?
At Anders Lee here on social media. Check out The Vanquished. Got a new episode coming up about John Edwards, which is a lot of fun.
Cool. Keep listening to the show. If you enjoy this show, please sign up for our Patreon. It's how we make the show and live and stuff. We have video now. We have a Discord. You can hang out with us on Discord. It's patreon.com/poddamnamerica. Bonus episodes and stuff. And there will be some supplementary stuff to this series on the Patreon, I believe. I'm going to talk about some films and some other books and stuff that play into it. We talked about Kropotkin a while back, so if you want to get a primer on Kropotkin, that's on the Patreon, and it'll help you understand Magonism. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you very much. It's finished.
Ciao.